In the frozen night of Korea, a convoy vanished without a trace, and the only thing that came back were the voices on the radio. They still call it the Long Road Out, that ribbon of ice and churned snow that wound from the Chosin Reservoir toward Hungnam in the winter of 1950. The Marines made headlines for breaking through. The Army got less ink, especially the logistics men who kept the fuel, rations, and morphine moving in trucks that rattled like bones. I wasn't a rifleman. I was a driver. 3rd Infantry Division, 10th Engineer Battalion attached to a mixed column of deuce-and-a-halfs and ambulances. My job was simple. Keep the heater from dying and the tires from deciding they were skates. We rolled out from a blown-out hamlet at 9:40 p.m., headlights hooded, convoy disciplined tight enough to crack teeth. The temperature sat somewhere below honest numbers. Breath froze on scarves. Oil moved like syrup. The wind came down off the mountains and knifed through canvas like it had a grudge. We called it Route Baker, though it had other names on other maps. On ours, it crawled along a narrow valley like a scar, and then climbed the shoulder of a ridge where Chinese machine guns had already learned the range. We expected contact. That wasn't the problem. The problem started with the radios. At 10:03 p.m., the lead half-track keyed up. Convoy, this is Able 1, check tone. Standard comms test. We answered down the line in turn, breath chuffing, teeth clicking. Bravo 1, good tone. Charlie 1, roger. Delta 1, and so on. When it came to Fox 2, the ambulance behind me, the handset was quiet. Then a voice, thin, distant, spoke. We're still loading. 10 minutes. I looked in my side mirror. Fox 2's windshield threw back moonlight. The driver's silhouette sat exactly where it should be. He keyed again, louder. Say again, control. That thin voice returned, a half-breath out of sync with the world. 10 minutes. We're still loading. My sergeant, Heller, leaned from the passenger seat and thumped the dash with a gloved fist. Ignore it, he said. Some lines bleeding. Fox 2, sound off normal. Fox 2 finally did, embarrassed and angry. Fox 2, good tone. The thin voice faded like steam. By 10:18 p.m., the road narrowed into the valley's throat. Snow squeaked under chains, dry as the squeal of chalk. Up ahead, a rock overhang pinched the pass, so tight the canvas tops brushed stone. I kept my eyes on the blackout slit and my hands loose on the wheel. Every 20 seconds, I hit the mic click, just a tap of the transmit button, to say I'm here, I'm here, I'm here without wasting words. The first whisper came through on a click, not a full transmission. Just the bleed you sometimes get when range and weather marry badly. Don't leave us, it said, featherlight, like a voice caught under glass. Heller didn't look at me. You didn't hear that, he said. At 10:32 p.m., the column halted at the base of the ridge switchbacks. The lead half-track had sighted movement on the upper trail. Figures cutting across the snow, too smooth for pack animals, too slow for a rush. We killed engines one by one. A ripple of silence, and the stars pressed closer in the cold. Men dismounted, boots thunking in snow, weapons low, breath hissing like steam valves. I climbed down and walked the line back to the ambulance. The driver, Hayes, had his headset around his neck, headphones steaming with breath. You copy those ghosts? He asked. Bad wires, I said. Or Chinese jabber bleeding through. He shook his head. That wasn't Chinese. He said it like a man who's certain about the sound of his own name. He cooked his hands over the exhaust. I did the same. In the dark beyond the trucks, pine branches rattled, a muffled rattle like teeth. We started up again at 10:45 p.m., crawling into the grade, engines laboring. The convoy stretched and bunched as trucks fought the switchbacks. Somewhere above, a flare hissed and sketched a green smear across the valley wall. No fire followed. Sometimes the enemy watched like that, counting trucks, learning rhythms. At 11:06 p.m., the rear guard called a halt. Convoy, this is tail end Charlie. Count discrepancy. Say again, discrepancy. A driver had counted 30 vehicles when we left the hamlet. The tally now said 29. Heller keyed up. Recount, he ordered. We all did, lips moving. Me, the half-track ahead, the ambulance behind. 29. The trucks were nose to tail around a hairpin. Nobody had room to slip out and pass. Nobody had turned around. The road offered no turnouts, no laybys. No shortcuts except a 1,000-foot drop. Hayes keyed his mic, voice high. Control, Fox 2 advise, who's missing? Control back at the Hamlet should have answered. We heard a click instead, and then a voice like a forgotten broadcast. Able company. Loading wounded, give us 10. Heller's mouth tightened. Drive, he said. We topped the second switchback at 11:20 p.m. The sky thin as tin. The wind came free and knifed down the cut. On the next straight, a snow eddy spun up off the bank and moved alongside at our speed, a waist-high, ghost-keeping pace with my door. I watched it without meaning to. After a moment, it collapsed into glitter, and the glitter sounded like a faraway radio. The third switchback gave us a view down the road behind. I counted headlights. 1, 2, 3, then lost count as fog rolled up from the valley floor in a flat, creeping sheet. Too thick for this cold, too fast for this wind. It pushed between trucks like a man shouldering into a crowd. Hayes called again. Fox 2 to convoy, visibility dropping. His voice cut out as the fog swallowed his headlight. We made the saddle at 11:38 p.m. and rolled along the ridge where the road carved straight through blown drifts. Banks piled high, on either side like pale walls. The moon hung low over the reservoir, a coin pressed to a dead man's eyelid. I reached for the mic click, habit, and felt the handset vibrate in my glove. Not a shock, a purr, like something on the other end had found the right frequency to purr back. Don't, Heller said, hands on the wheel. At 11:44 p.m., a man screamed over the net. Not a word, a scream, short, clipped, cut off by a grunt like a man hitting ice. We all flinched and looked for muzzle flashes. None came. The scream repeated from a different speaker, thinner, farther away, as if the radio had become a canyon and this sound had learned how to echo. Then it faded into breathing, steady, calm, colder than the night. The medic in the second ambulance, Rossi, clicked twice. Fox 1, check in. A click came back from somewhere that wasn't Fox 1. Then Rossi's own voice came over the net, 40 seconds delayed, asking for himself. Heller said nothing. He took off his glove and pressed his bare hand to the windshield. Frost bloomed under his palm like a fern. At 11:50 p.m., the road widened to a blasted-out lay-by where a rock slide had been cleared by dynamite, leaving a bald scar of frozen scree. The column slowed as Lead probed the edge with a flashlight and a bayonet. Snow squeaked. The wind went quiet for a breath like oil cooling. We stopped. I stepped down in a crust that cracked and settled, my boots ringing thin against stone. Down the line, men stamped and muttered. A field phone buzzed somewhere. A crank turned. A curse. I was 10 steps from Fox 2 when the fog rose from the road behind us and stood like a wall. Mount up, Heller barked. We're moving. Now. Engines coughed and caught. The wall of fog moved closer, just enough that we all noticed it was moving against the wind. Heller grabbed my sleeve and shoved me toward the cab. Eyes forward, he said. We rolled out at 11:57 p.m., crossing the scar. The fog followed, slow as a funeral procession. I watched my mirror long enough to see it swallow Fox 2's grill. Then I faced forward because the ridge narrowed and the snowbank on the right side hit a drop I didn't want to meet by accident. At 12:05 a.m., we hit the long downgrade. Gravity helped, brakes didn't. Every driver in Korea learned the same prayer. Pump, downshift, listen. The men in the back coughed into scarves and told lies about hot places. The radio said nothing for a time, just carrier hiss, clean and empty, like someone had scrubbed it with wire. Then, at 12:12 a.m., it spoke in a voice I knew and didn't. Able 1 to convoy. We're still loading. 10 minutes. The hair on my arms rose under wool. Heller reached for the handset. I slapped his wrist on reflex. He glared, then nodded once. We didn't answer. At 12:16 a.m., the rear guard called another count. Tail end Charlie to convoy. Discrepancy negative. Say again, negative. Count is... His voice faltered. 30. Heller's jaw worked. No, he said. No, we left with 30. I said, we left with 30. Heller shook his head once. We left with 29. I turned to argue, already hot with certainty, and nearly drove us into the wall. He grabbed the wheel and corrected, breath white in the cab, eyes black in the slits of his scarf. Drive, he said again, and I did, And that was the last ordinary thing we did for days. At 12:25 a.m., as we rounded the final bend before the valley floor and the bracket of burned farms where we'd planned to bivouac, the radio filled with voices. Not chatter, not Chinese, not ours. They came like wind in a culvert, layered, familiar shapes made wrong by time. Some said loading, some said 10 minutes. One said my name in my mother's voice and asked if I'd remember my gloves. Heller clicked the handset once, a tiny act of defiance. The voices clicked back from 3 trucks behind us, delayed and hollow. Hayes and Fox 2 keyed up to swear. His voice answered him 30 seconds later, calmer, from a road that wasn't there. We rolled into the burned farms at 12:32 a.m. and set break. The lead counted. The rear counted. We all counted. The number came up 30. We walked the line with flashlights and gloves stiff with frost, tapping bumpers, exchanging curses because cursing felt like an anchor. Under canvas, silhouettes shifted and coughed. In the second-to-last truck, a flatbed with tarps over crates of rations, someone moved and spoke softly. "Give us 10 minutes," the someone said. We peeled back the tarp. The truck bed was empty. No crates. No men. Just a thin drift of hoarfrost arranged in the shape of stacked boxes and the outlines of boots where no one stood. The frost steamed, just slightly like breath. Heller tapped his watch. 12:35 a.m. He looked up the road, back into the dark we'd come out of, and said, so quietly I almost missed it, "We left with 30. We arrived with 30. Somewhere in the middle, another convoy joined us. Behind us, the fog settled in the valley like a camp setting down to sleep. The radios clicked once, like a polite knock on a door. Then, clear as a winter star, a voice said, "Convoy, this is Able One. We're still loading. 10 minutes. We did not answer. We learned to keep time after that, and to count more carefully than men should have to count. Because in the nights that followed, the numbers on Route Baker didn't always add up to people, and the voices never ran out of minutes. The official report called it communications anomaly. That was the phrase typed in black ink on the daily log when we staggered into Hungnam 2 days later with frostbitten ears and trucks leaking oil like they bled out. But among ourselves, sitting shoulder to shoulder in the mess tent with coffee cooling to sludge, we called it what it felt like, a haunting. By December 4th, 1950, every man in the convoy knew the voices weren't an accident. Radio bleed doesn't repeat your own words back 30 seconds late. Crosstalk doesn't whisper your name in your mother's cadence. And fog doesn't move against the wind. But the war didn't care. The Chinese army pressed down from the north, and the order was the same as it always was. Keep moving south, keep the supplies rolling, keep the wounded alive long enough to load them on ships. So we drove. That night, our convoy joined with 2 others, 40-odd trucks strung nose to tail on the road that locals called the Eye Spine. The moon hung like a brittle coin, and the wind roared off the ridges as if the mountains themselves were angry we dared to cross. At 8:40 p.m., I took my place in the column with Heller beside me, scarf stiff with old frost. He didn't talk much anymore. None of us did. Words had a way of being borrowed. At 9:10 p.m., the lead truck reported lights on the ridge. Too steady for campfires. Too pale for flares. Maybe villages, the captain said, but the map showed nothing for 20 miles. The lights winked out when our headlights brushed the switchback. At 9:23 p.m., we lost comms with the tail. Nothing unusual. Mountains killed signals like they killed warmth. But when the net returned, the voice we heard wasn't Tail End Charlie. It was Rossi, the medic who had vanished the night before with Fox 1. Hold for 10 minutes, he said, calm, clip, businesslike. Still loading. 10 minutes. The captain barked for verification. Silence answered. Then Rossi's voice repeated itself. Same cadence, same breath, as if a record needle had dropped on a groove cut into the dark. We pushed on. At 10:02 p.m., the fog returned. This time it didn't rise from valleys or creep along the road. It rolled down from the ridges, pouring over rocks and trees like smoke from a funeral pyre. By 10:06 p.m., we were driving inside it. Headlights stabbed 10 feet ahead and died. Shadows loomed at the edges, keeping pace, their outlines bending like cloth in the wind. I clicked my mic once out of habit. The fog clicked back. Heller slapped the handset out of my glove. Don't feed it, he growled. At 10:15 p.m., the column halted at a blown bridge. Engineers laid planks while drivers lit cigarettes in cupped palms, smoke freezing mid-curl. That's when Hayes from Fox 2 staggered out of the mist, face white as chalk. "Count again," he said. We did. 40 trucks when we left the last hamlet. 41 standing on the far bank now, their outlines vague behind the fog. Men swore. Some spat. Heller just pulled his scarf higher and watched as the extra truck's hood light flickered once, twice, then winked out like a candle. When the fog shifted, the space it had occupied was empty. At 10:32 p.m., engines roared across the planks, and we rattled on. I kept my eyes forward. Looking back felt like an invitation, but I couldn't ignore what I heard. The radio hissed low, like breath against glass, and through it came words I should never have heard again. "Son, you remember to wear your gloves." It was my mother's voice. She'd said that exact line when I shipped out from Fort Lewis in October. My stomach knotted. My gloves were on my hands, stiff with sweat, but I nearly tore them off to check. Heller grabbed the mic and snapped. "Convoy to all units, silence discipline. No chatter." The voice obeyed, too quickly, as if it had been waiting for the order. At 11:05 p.m., gunfire echoed through the fog. Short bursts, disciplined, too far to hit us, but close enough to make us flinch. The lead half-track barked for flares. One hissed skyward and burned red. The fog swallowed it whole, glow dimming until nothing remained but smoke curling from the tube. The gunfire ended. No enemy appeared. But when the smoke cleared, a truck was missing. Not abandoned. Not destroyed. Just gone. We reached a clearing at 11:50 p.m. and set break to regroup. The captain walked the line, counting with his flashlight. 39. He stopped at my hood, scribbled in his notebook, and muttered, "God help us if the numbers keep changing." Hayes came up behind him, lips cracked, eyes wide. "What if they're not our numbers?" he whispered. The captain ignored him, but Heller heard. He always did. And when the captain moved on, Heller leaned close and said, "If it's not our count, then whose convoy are we in?" We rolled again at 12:08 a.m. The fog thinned into tatters. Frost glittered on trees, each branch sharp as glass. For 10 blessed minutes, the radios stayed silent. Then, at 12:19 a.m., every set in the column keyed at once. No hands touched the transmit buttons. Speakers crackled alive with layered voices. Men we knew, men we didn't, all repeating the same command in perfect unison. "Hold 10 minutes. Still loading. Hold 10 minutes. Still loading." The drivers froze, staring at dials that glowed like eyes in the cab. Some clapped hands over ears. Hayes curled against his wheel, whispering, "It's inside the net now. It doesn't need us to speak anymore." The captain shouted into the void, "Identify yourselves." The voices obeyed. One by one, they said our names. Not just surnames. Full names. Mothers' names. Addresses. Words we hadn't spoken in months, some in years. When they spoke mine, my throat locked. I wanted to answer, to prove I was still me. But Heller grabbed my wrist and squeezed so hard my bones ground. "Don't," he said. "That's how it pulls." At 12:27 a.m., the voices stopped. Just hiss. Just wind. The convoy pushed south again, eyes burning, hands stiff. But every man knew the truth. Whatever rode the net with us was learning. It had started with ghost orders. Now it spoke like family. At 12:40 a.m., the fog lifted completely. For the first time in hours, the moon lit the valley floor ahead. The relief should have felt like salvation. It didn't, because standing in the snow where no road existed, lined up neat as a parade, were trucks. Dozens of them. Old models, canvas rotted, tires flat. Their frames gleamed with ice. And in each cab sat a figure staring straight ahead, faces blank, eyes rimed with frost. The captain screamed for speed. Engines howled. Snow churned. We barreled through the clearing without looking left or right. When we emerged on an open road again, Rossi's voice came through calm as ever. 10 minutes. Still loading. Heller leaned forward against the dash, eyes closed, lips moving in a prayer I couldn't hear. And in the hiss that followed, another voice whispered, so low only I seemed to catch it. "You're already with us." When dawn finally broke over the ridge, it didn't feel like morning. The sun was thin, a weak smear that did nothing to cut the cold. The column huddled on the outskirts of a ruined village, engines ticking as ice melted in brittle pops. We drank coffee that tasted of tin and fear, and every man kept looking at the radios even when they were silent. The captain made his report to division at 7:10 a.m. He didn't mention the voices, didn't mention the phantom trucks. His notes read, "Limited contact, convoy intact, proceeding south." He closed the log, jaw tight, and ordered us to move by 8 a.m. But we all knew the truth. We hadn't been intact since the ridge. That day's march was shorter, barely 20 miles, but it stretched like a noose. The mountains fell away into rolling valleys where snow lay deep over half-buried farmhouses. Every ruin looked like it might be occupied, every hill like it might spit fire. And over everything hung a silence too complete, as though the land itself was holding its breath. At 10:15 a.m., Heller pointed to the slope on our right. Tracks in the snow, boot prints fresh, dozens of them. The column halted while scouts fanned out. They returned white-faced. The prints didn't lead to the tree line or back to the road. They simply stopped mid-stride, as though the men had walked into air and vanished. The captain barked for movement, but Hayes whispered what we all felt. They're walking with us now. By 11 a.m., the fog returned. Not the thick blanket of the night before, but long fingers curling down the ridges, brushing our trucks with icy hands. The radios stayed quiet first. Then, at 11:14 a.m., Rossi's voice bled through again. "Convoy, this is Fox 1. Holding. 10 minutes." I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Fox 1 had been gone for days. Heller just stared at the handset like it was a snake. Then another voice cut across. "Convoy, this is Tail End Charlie. 39 vehicles confirmed. Repeat, 39. But when the count came down the line, we still had 40. Men began to argue over headsets, voices rising, panic bleeding through. The captain shouted for radio discipline. The fog thickened, and in the static that followed, the voices began to change. They didn't just repeat the same phrases anymore. They began to sound like us. At 11:22 a.m., I heard my own voice crackle from the dash. "This is Baker 1. Visibility low. Holding for orders." Heller swore and ripped the handset free, yanking the cord from its plug. The speaker stayed alive, hissing, and then the voice came again. My voice calm and steady, speaking lines I hadn't said. "This is Baker 1. 38 confirmed. 38. I wanted to scream that we still had 40. But Hayes came up on the net, voice trembling. "Fox 2 copies 38. And just like that, men began to believe the radios more than their own eyes. We rolled on at 11:40 a.m., fog pressing tighter with each mile. The road narrowed between cliffs, sheer drops yawning to our left. Chains clattered, gears ground, nerves frayed. At 12:05 p.m., the voice of the captain came over the net, ordering a halt. But the captain was standing 10 feet from me, headset unplugged, mouth shut. Men obeyed anyway. Engines died. The column froze mid-pass with cliffs on one side and fog on the other. I leaned out my window and shouted, "Ignore it. That's not him." But before I could say more, the fog parted, and there it was. Another convoy. Trucks stretched nose to tail along a side road that didn't exist on any map. Old models, canvas rotted, windows black. Frost covered their windshields from the inside, and in the silence, the radios clicked once, twice, then filled with layered voices, all speaking in unison. 38 confirmed. Still loading. 10 minutes. Heller slammed my door shut. "Drive," he snapped. "Don't look." We lurched forward, engines roaring as the column dragged itself south again. But every driver had seen it. Every man knew the truth now. We weren't alone out there. At 12:30 p.m., the fog thinned again, revealing open snowfields littered with burned-out trucks. Some were American, some Chinese, some so old they might have belonged to wars fought decades earlier. They all stared with empty windows, black holes gaping like sockets. Hayes whispered over the net, "How many convoys are out here?" No one answered. By 1 p.m., we reached another ruined hamlet where we set break for a quick check. The captain counted trucks himself, walking the line, touching each hood with his glove. When he returned, his face was pale. 38, he said. I looked at Heller. We'd left with 40 that morning. I swore I could still see them all lined up, noses steaming, engines ticking. But when I counted, I only reached 38. Heller shook his head, eyes dark. "It's not stealing trucks," he muttered. "It's stealing memory, making us forget what we had." That night, as we huddled in the cab with breath fogging the windshield, the radios stayed alive even when the sets were cold. Voices whispered through the wires like wind and bones. I heard Hayes begging for help. I heard Rossi calling coordinates that didn't exist. And once, just before I dozed, I heard myself again, calm as a corpse. "This is Baker 1. Arrived intact. 38 vehicles confirmed." I snapped awake, sweat freezing on my collar. Heller's eyes were open in the dark, reflecting the dash lights. He'd heard it too. By morning, the numbers would be different again. And soon, we wouldn't be sure which convoy we belonged to anymore. Word count, 1045. The blizzard came down on us at 3:40 a.m. No warning, no slow build, just a wall of white that erased the world in minutes. The road disappeared under drifts. The ridges vanished into nothing. Our headlights pushed 5 feet and stopped cold. We crept forward anyway, chained tires grinding, engines howling like beasts caught in traps. By 4:10 a.m., the radios began again. At first, just the hiss of static, then the whisper of breath, then words, layered and strange, like prayers translated badly. 36 confirmed, holding 10 minutes, still loading. Heller gripped the dash hard enough to crack the ice on his gloves. "It's cutting us down," he said, one by one. I counted again. We'd left Hungnam with 40 trucks. Yesterday, we were 38. Now, by the logbooks, the count had slipped to 36. But when I looked in my mirrors, I swore I saw the same line of hood lights, the same number of engines steaming in the dark. At 4:30 a.m., the snow eased just enough to reveal a bridge ahead, a skeleton of timbers stretched over a frozen river. The captain dismounted to check stability. He walked halfway across, boots crunching, flashlight beam cutting the dark. Then his voice barked over the net, "Convoy halt. Wait 10 minutes." But I could see him, standing on the bridge, headset hanging loose around his neck. His lips didn't move. Heller spat into the floorboard. "Not him," he muttered. "Something else." The column rumbled uncertain, engines idling, men glancing at each other with wide, frost-cracked eyes. Then, from the rear, a driver obeyed. He killed his engine. The silence spread like contagion, truck by truck, hood lights dimming, until only a few of us still had our motors running. And then we heard it. From the far side of the river came the low rumble of another convoy. Engines, gears, tires crunching snow. But no lights. Just sound, growing nearer. Hayes whispered into the mic. "Tail end Charlie, confirmed sight." The answer came back in Rossi's voice. "Convoy intact. 36. Still loading." The sound grew louder until it pressed on my chest like weight. The bridge planks groaned as though trucks were crossing. But nothing moved on the span except the captain, standing frozen with his flashlight, shaking his head slowly back and forth like a man refusing a bargain. At 4:50 a.m., the first truck lurched forward, obeying orders no one had given. Its driver's face was blank, eyes glassy in the dim glow of his dash. He steered onto the bridge, wood groaning, frost exploding under chains. Others followed. Heller slammed my shoulder. "Go," he hissed. "Don't let it take you." I jammed the clutch and forced us forward. We crossed with the convoy, but I kept my eyes locked on the hood, refusing to look left or right. Behind us, the noise of the unseen trucks thundered louder, echoing in my bones. By 5:10 a.m., we reached the far bank. I risked a glance in the mirror. The bridge behind us was empty, but the planks still shook and frost still shattered under invisible tires. The captain rejoined us, face gray, eyes hollow. He didn't ask who had cut their engines. He didn't mention the phantom convoy. He only said, "Drive." At 6 a.m., daylight broke. We pulled into another hamlet. Roofs cave under snow, chimneys like broken teeth. We parked in a tight circle, exhaust drifting into the pale sky. Men counted the column again. 36. But when we compared notes, nobody agreed on which trucks were gone. Some swore Fox 2 had vanished. Others swore it was Able 1. I remembered seeing them both. The logbooks were no help. Entries smudged, numbers blotted, as if the paper itself was being rewritten. At 6:45 a.m., we heard movement in one of the ruined houses. A squad kicked the door in, rifles raised. Inside, they found crates of rations stacked neatly, still sealed, as if waiting for pickup. The manifest tag read, Able Convoy, 1944. None of us knew what to say. We burned the crates for warmth. The food inside had long since turned to dust. By 8 a.m., the captain gave the order to roll again. The snow had eased, leaving pale sun and brutal silence. We rattled out of the hamlet, nerves frayed, eyes raw. That's when the radios spoke again. Not static, not whispers. Names. Every truck in the column heard them. Our names, spoken clear and cold, in voices we knew. Mothers, fathers, brothers long dead. They called to us one by one. Some drivers froze, hands slack on their wheels. One truck swerved and nearly toppled into the ditch. Heller grabbed the mic from my dash and shouted into it. We're not yours. The radios laughed. Not loud, not mocking. Just a low ripple of sound like breath on glass. Then silence. At 9:15 a.m., the fog returned, thicker than ever. Hood lights glowed like candles in milk. We crawled forward blind, every nerve on fire. Then the radios clicked alive once more. Convoy, this is Able 1. Arrived intact. 36 confirmed. But the words didn't come from the dash. They came from behind us. Heller turned, scarf stiff with frost, eyes wide. Through the fog, I saw shapes moving. Trucks, dozens of them, following in perfect line. Hood lights dim, engine silent, wheels spinning without sound. Their cabs were full. Faces stared from the windshields, pale and frost-rimmed. And among them, I saw myself, sitting in the cab of a phantom truck, hands on the wheel, eyes hollow, lips moving in time with the radio. I nearly wrenched the wheels sideways in panic, but Heller's grip locked me steady. Eyes forward, he hissed. Don't let it know you saw. By 9:40 a.m., the fog thinned just enough to show open ground ahead. The phantom trucks faded like mist, their faces lingering longest before vanishing into snow. We didn't speak of it. We couldn't. But every man in that column knew. The convoy wasn't just stealing trucks anymore. It was stealing us. At 10 a.m., the captain called another count. 35. And this time, when I tried to remember who had been there, my mind found only fog. By the time we reached the last valley before Hungnam, we were 35 by count, though I still swore I saw 40 headlights in my mirror. Men didn't argue anymore. They just wrote the number in their logs and kept driving. Fighting memory was like fighting the cold. You could only hold out so long before it froze you hollow. At 2:15 p.m., the road dropped into a basin choked with snowdrifts. Burned farms leaned on the horizon, their chimneys coughing smoke long since dead. The fog rode with us, no longer creeping or curling, but flowing steady, a second column beside our own. Trucks ghosting trucks, wheels turning in silence, eyes pale behind frosted glass. The captain ordered one last halt at 2:40 p.m., setting brake near a stone bridge scarred by shell fire. We clustered under canvas, stamping frost from boots, choking down coffee so bitter it tasted like iron. Hayes sat beside me, eyes rimmed with red, whispering the same thing over and over. We left with 40. We left with 40. We left with 40. Heller said nothing. He just checked his watch, 2:44 p.m., and kept his hand on the radio handset like a man holding a loaded pistol. The fog thickened at 2:50 p.m. The radios clicked once, twice, then came alive. Convoy, this is Able 1. 35 confirmed. Arrived intact. Holding 10 minutes. The captain barked for silence. We obeyed, but the radios didn't. They filled with our voices again. Calm, steady, reporting positions we hadn't reached, calling orders we hadn't given. One even spoke our arrival report for Hungnam, words we hadn't said yet. And then, at 2:56 p.m., the fog parted and we saw them. The other convoy, dozens of trucks, stretched along the opposite ridge, marching nose to tail in perfect silence. Some wore paint long obsolete. Some bore markings none of us recognized. All were rimed with frost, canvas stiff with ice. Their drivers sat upright, eyes white, hands fixed to wheels. And every face in those cabs was ours. Not likenesses. Us. Each man doubled, staring hollow-eyed across the snow. Hayes whimpered, clutching the wheel like a lifeline. That's me, he whispered. That's me sitting over there. The captain screamed to move. Engines roared. Chains bit. But the fog closed in faster than any truck could roll. It swallowed the bridge, the banks, the valley floor. And in that white, the radios filled with one last command. Switch over. 35 confirmed. Switch over. 35. Trucks began to vanish. Not in explosions, not in gunfire, just gone. One moment headlights glowing, the next only fog. Men screamed over the net, begging, cursing, crying. Their voices cut off mid-word, then returned seconds later from the phantom convoy. Calm, flat, already part of the chorus. I gunned my engine, cab rattling, snow spitting from chains. Heller slapped the dash and yelled, "Keep your eyes forward." The fog pressed, so close I could see only the faint red of the taillight ahead. At 3:05 p.m., we broke through. The fog tore open like cloth ripped by nails, and suddenly the valley widened into the frozen plain before Hung Nam. Ships lay beyond the harbor, funnels smoking, salvation waiting. We thundered into the open, engines screaming, breath steaming. When we finally set brake in the assembly yard, the count came down the line. 32. The captain wrote it in the log without comment. 32. No one mentioned the men we'd lost. No one mentioned the voices. But that night, in the mess tent, I heard a radio click from the supply shack. Then a voice, calm as ever, spoke into the stillness. "Convoy, this is Able 1. 35 confirmed. Holding 10 minutes." I froze with my mug halfway to my lips. Heller met my eyes across the table. He didn't look surprised. He just said, "They're still counting. And one day, they'll reach the right number." I didn't ask what the right number was, because deep down, I already knew. And sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I hear the click of a handset in the dark. "Convoy, this is Baker 1. 32 confirmed. Still loading. 10 minutes. The voice is mine.